4. Councillors Alec Allison, Jerry Convery, Colin Dewar, Gladys Ferguson Miller are present. Councillor Elise Frame is not present. With apologies from Councillor Leslie MacDonald. Councillor Richard Nelson is present. With apologies from Councillor Norman Ray and Councillor Graham Scott. Councillor Maureen Devlin is attending as a substitute. And Councillor David Shearer is also present. Thank you, and I'll now pass you back to the Chair for today's business.
Thank you, Stuart. Item number 1, is any declarations of interest? Agenda item number 2. As the minutes of a previous meeting, these are on pages 5 to 12. These are submitted for approval as a correct record. I will move these as a correct record.
I'll second it.
All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 3 then is review of case in respect of planning application P201877, pages 13 to 136. The item before us today is a notice of review from Block Architects on behalf of Mr William Fleming. The applicant is asking the PLRB to review the planning officer's determination to refuse planning permission for the formation of 6 house plots with associated works at Hull Hill Farm on the Lanark Road from Hazelbank to Auchenheath near Crisford. I'm going to ask the planning advisor now to describe the background to this request for review to the members.
Right, thank you, Chair. So this case relates to Hull Hill Farm, which is located approximately halfway between the A72 Clyde Valley Road and Kirkmuir Hill. It forms part of a former farmsteading which has now been disused for a number of years. The site of the review, it was previously occupied by a modern agricultural shed, which is now being demolished. The site itself forms part of a wider bit of land that was subject to a planning consent back in 2008, which involved the conversion of some traditional buildings at the front of the site, plus the erection of 4 houses on the site that we're talking about today. The site itself, it would be accessed by a private road, and that would then go on to the Lanark Road, which, as I say, sits between the Clyde Valley Road and Kirkmuir Hill. The case officer refused the application, and there were 10 reasons for refusal attached to the decision notice. The reasoning for that decision is set out in the report of handling, which are in the papers. Perhaps the 2 key policies that led to the refusal are that it would be contrary to policy 17 of MPF 4, as the site is in the rural area and the proposal didn't accord with any of appropriate uses within a rural area. And also policy 4 in the South Lancashire Local Development Plan, which deals with greenbelt and rural areas. And again, the case officer's view was that the proposed dwellings would constitute sporadic development, not within a settlement, and it wouldn't accord with wider principles of development in the rural area. Following on from that, the view of the officer was it also wouldn't accord with policy 15 in MPF 4, which deals with local living, in particular the fact that it wouldn't be connected to a settlement or surrounding services. In addition, members will see that during the consultation process, Roads and Transportation objected to the application on the grounds that the applicant hadn't demonstrated that the visibility displays from the private road onto the main road could be met. The applicants were asked to demonstrate that they had control over those displays on the land required for those displays, but didn't, and that again forms a reason for refusal as well. In terms of the applicant's submission, they've set out a number of points that they believe justifies the proposal. First of all, that the houses would be sustainable in terms of the method of building and the means of generating heat and energy. They've advised that the main road, there's a bus service between them, which gives access to Lanark and Lesmhago and beyond. There's a primary school at Hazelbank, which is close by, and also Blackwood's 2 primary schools. The reference policy 17, the emphasis on reuse of brownfield land as well. And they advise that the site is vacant just due to the demolition of the buildings that were formerly on the site. And they also, in terms of the access issue or the visibility display issue, they believe that a speed check, if it was carried out, would demonstrate that the sight lines roads are asking for could be reduced. That hasn't been provided by the applicants, has to be said. And they've also suggested that the council could impose a condition which would require a speed reduction sign at round about the site, which would warn drivers of emergent traffic. So, in terms of the review today, the key things then are policy, whether it accords with policy in NPF 4 and the LDP 2, in particular whether the principles of development in the rural area have been met and satisfied. And there's also the issue about road safety as well. So I'll hand back to you, Chair, to carry out the review.
Thank you, Tony. The first point for the PLRB then to consider and decide is how to proceed with this review. The applicant has advised that they consider the review can proceed without any further procedure. Taking account of what's in our papers, we have to decide whether they do in fact contain sufficient information for us to determine the review today, or if we need more written information, a hearing or a visit to the site. I think that all the information we have, plus the detailed photographs of the site, provides us with all we need to have to consider this review, without either a site visit or hearing or any further written submissions. Do the members therefore agree that we can proceed without a site visit, hearing or any additional information?
Agreed.
Anyone otherwise minded? We will then proceed to the review, and I open up for any discussions or comments. If you could please indicate now. Councillor David Shearer, please.
Thank you, Chair. Given that this site is a former farmsteading, and from the pictures that are in the pack that we have, it's unlikely that it will ever return to agricultural use, either for growing crops or keeping animals. And I've got to say that the development itself would seem to be a fairly well-designed development, whereby it forms a courtyard. It's not breaching into a greenfield site. It's not establishing gap sites. It's very self-contained. My one major issue would be the roads issue. And I think that the fact that that has not been resolved is very concerning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor David Shearer. I'll bring in Councillor Alec Allison, please.
Yeah, just along the same lines as David, it's what we are identifying as brownfield sites does concern me, because without a major intervention, this land is not going to be able to return to any productive use. So what are we going to do with it? Basically, it's basically an eyesore if it's left the way it is. The one thing in NPF 4 that I don't hear mentioned about is how we are going to, how this relates to increasing the rural population. Surely this is a site that would be ideally identified as something that can do that. And I think, as the applicant has said, the sight lines could be conditioned if we're willing to go down that airline. So basically concerns around these, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just respond to Councillor Shearer and Councillor Allison's points there. I think there is a previous consent on this site, obviously, for redevelopment, and that decision was made under a much earlier local local development plan. In fact, I don't think there was a local development plan in place at that point. It was a local plan in the old terms, and certainly before MPF4. So there is always a fallback position for the applicant to erect those 4 houses. I think when it comes to Councillor Allison's point about increasing rural population, I mean, yes, we do support that, but only in the right places. In this particular case, even though the members might accept that the principle of development here accords with policy 17 of MPF4, we still have to take account of whether it complies with other policies, and particularly in this case, the local living element. And we just don't think in this case, or the case of it, certainly didn't think in this case that aspect applied. So I think the decision has to be taken in the round. The principle might be acceptable in members' eyes, but other policies have to be taken into account as well. In terms of the road safety issues, I don't think a condition to deal with sightlines would be appropriate in this case, because the applicant hasn't shown that they control the land required to do that. But that's obviously for members to take into account whether a condition will be satisfactory or not.
Thank you, Tony. If there's no further questions or comments, can I then summarise the points made? The application is for planning permission for the formation of 6 house plots with associated works at Hull Hill Farm on the Lanark Road from Hazelbag to Auchenheath near Crisford. The adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2 identifies the site as being with land designated as in the rural area of South Lanarkshire. If we consider that there is no valid policy justification to support formation of 6 house plots with associated works at this location, and it would not accord with policies 1, 2, 14, 15 and 17 of MPF4 and policies 245, DM1 and GBRA1 of adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2, permission can be refused. Or if we consider that there is adequate justification for the formation of 6 house plots with associated works, we can grant plan permission subject to conditions. Our options here today are to uphold, reverse or vary the planning decision. I will now invite for decision and the reasons. Councillor David Shearer.
Thank you, Chair. I would move that we grant, subject to conditions, on the grounds that it is a brownfield site in the rural area.
Do we have a seconder for Councillor Alec Allison?
Field site that contributes to policy 17 rural population, and it is about the only use of that site.
Councillor Allison, sorry, can you just go back to the start? There was a wee late dip just as you came in, so we could just start again. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be pleased to second this motion, adding along the lines that there is no other pertinent use for this site, and it would clean the area up and also contribute towards rural population.
Thank you. Is there any further recommendations? I would move that, I'll go against that. I would move that we refuse the plan on the back of the recommendation from the planning officer.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you. We will then bring this to a vote. I'll ask Stuart just to confirm procedural issues. Just to give my reasons, I'm happy with the officer's recommendations and the recommendations that are within the papers for refusal.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can I just first of all check with Councillor Shearer? Obviously, Councillor Allison has added some grounds, so combining both grounds, it would be that you're moving that you grant planning permission subject to conditions on the grounds that it's a brownfield site, there's no other current use for the site, and it would contribute towards increasing the rural population. Are you happy with that, or those grounds, Councillor Shearer?
Yes, I'm happy with those grounds.
Sorry, I was just having a wee technical issue there. So just to recap, the motion proposed by Councillor Shearer and seconded by Councillor Allison is to grant planning permission subject to conditions on the grounds that it is a brownfield site, there's no other current use for the site, and it would contribute towards increasing the rural population. The amendment proposed by Councillor Nelson and seconded by Councillor Convery is that planning permission be refused for the reasons outlined in the officer's decision notice. The vote is now live, and I would ask if members could please indicate your voting preference. It would appear that 2 members still haven't voted. If you could please make sure that you've indicated your preference. All members have now indicated their preference. I will now stop the vote. Six members have indicated that they voted in favour of the motion, and 1 member in favour of the amendment.
We voted the motion.
Right, okay.
I thought that was the motion.
They're amending the motion.
It would appear that there's been some confusion in terms of what the motion is and what the amendment is, so we're going to just run the vote again.
I just run through, just tell me what the motion amendment is.
So to recap, please, the motion is to grant planning permission subject to conditions on the grounds that it is a brownfield site, there's no other current use for the site, and it would contribute towards increasing the rural population. That's been proposed by Councillor Shearer and seconded by Councillor Allison. And the amendment proposed by Councillor Nelson and seconded by Councillor Convery is that planning permission be refused for the reasons outlined in the officer's decision notice. The vote is now live again. If you could please indicate your voting preference. Thank you. Okay, all members have now indicated their preference. I'm now going to stop the vote. 4 members have voted in favour of the motion, and 3 members have voted in favour of the amendment. I therefore declare the motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. We will now adjourn until 10:25 to allow the conditions to be passed around. And if you can indicate when we come back, if you have any questions or comments on the conditions. So we'll meet back at 10:25. Conditions and reasons have been passed around. Everyone should have them. Are we all happy to accept the conditions and reasons? Everyone agreed? All agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item number 4. Review of case in respect of planning application P231297. That's pages 137 to 260 in your pack. Item before us today is a notice of review from Mrs Emma McGarty. The applicant is asking the PLRB to review the planning officer determination to refuse planning permission in principle for the erection of a detached dwelling on land near Woodside Cottage, Liberton, Lanark. I'm going to ask the planning advisor to describe the background to this request. Tony?
Thanks, Chair. The application, I'll just run through a summary of the request for review and the officer's position. So the application for planning permission in principle was refused in December 2023. The reasons for refusal are set out in the report of handling, and the key reasons for the refusal were, in terms of location, the site's in the rural area. As an unallocated greenfield site, the proposal does not meet the requirements of either NPF4 or LDP2 housing policies and the rural housing policies. Focusing on rural housing, it would be contrary to NPF4 policy 17 because the location does not meet any of the policy criteria. It's not a brownfield site. It does not support a rural business, croft or farm holding. Likewise, in terms of policy 4 of the LDP, it does not meet any of the criteria, so the need for the dwelling in the rural area has not been demonstrated. The proposal is also contrary to LDP policy 5 on access suitability. The Transport Service objected as more than 5 houses would be served off of private access. Upgrading works to a public road standard would be required. The key issues are rural housing and the roads objection. The report of handling has listed other reasons for refusal. One of these relates to woodland. The site is set within a long-established woodland designation. The planner's position is that regardless of the designation, the proposal is contrary to Policy 6 of NPF4 and Policy NHE 13 of the LDP, as it results in woodland removal, which does not result in significant and clearly defined additional public benefits. For information, there have been 2 previous applications for dwellings served off the same track road in 2000 and 2004. And both were refused on rural policy and roads grounds. The appellant's notice of review can be summarised as, in terms of the location and rural housing, the proposal may not meet their criteria, but it will be a small tucked-away house which they consider would have minimal negative impacts on the surrounding area. The appellant considers there is a need for this type of house in this specific location and feels that whilst not meeting the requirement for rural housing or associated rural business, consideration should be given to her circumstances in terms of a wish to live near elderly family and the appellant working in the general locality. In terms of the roads objection, the appellant considers the parameters are unduly restrictive in this case and the proposal would have no significant impact. In terms of other matters on woodland, while the site is designated as a long-established woodland, any current woodland biodiversity value is questioned by the appellant, who states that the site has been subject to clearing and planting over the years and could be improved in the longer term with replanting and other measures. So I'll hand back to you, Chair, to carry out the review.
Thank you, Michael. The first point for the PLRB then is to consider and decide how to proceed with the review. The applicant has requested that further written submissions be sought and an accompanied site visit take place. Taking account of what is in the papers, we have to decide whether they do in fact contain sufficient information for us to determine the review, or if we need more written information, a hearing or a visit to the site. I do think that all the information we have, plus the detailed photographs we have, does provide us with all we need to consider this review without either visiting a site or a hearing or any further written submissions. Do the members therefore agree that we can proceed without a site visit, hearing or any additional information?
Agreed.
Agreed. Anyone otherwise minded? Okay, we will then open the review, and I will open the review for discussion or any comments. If you could please indicate now, please. There are no questions or comments. Can I summarise the points made then? The application is for planning permission in principle for the erection of one house on land 60 metres northwest of Woodside Cottage, Muirhouse, Bigger Road, Liberton, Lanark. The adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2 identifies the site as being within land designated as in the rural area of South Lanarkshire. If we consider there is no valid policy justification to support the erection of a dwelling house at this location, and it would not accord with Policy 3, 6, 15, 16 and 17 of MPF 4, and Policies 4, 5, DM1 and NHE 13 of the adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2, permission can be refused. Or, if we consider that there is adequate justification for the erection of a dwelling house, we could grant planning permission subject to conditions. Our options here today then are to uphold, reverse or vary the planning decision. I will now invite for decisions and reasons. Councillor Alec Allison, please.
No, sorry, I didn't press anything, Mr. Chairman. My apologies if I did.
That'll be our first, Councillor Allison, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Are members then minded to uphold the officer's decision to refuse planning permission? Yes. Agreed. Seconded. Is anyone else otherwise minded? Therefore, the decision of this PLRB is to refuse planning permission, as we are satisfied that the proposed development would be contrary to Policy 3, 6, 15, 16 and 17 of MPF 4 and Policies 4, 5, DM1 and NHE 13 of the adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2. The next stage is that a written notice will be issued by the PLRB, and this should be issued within 28 days. Agenda item number 5. Is review of case in respect of planning application P23-1213, pages 261 to 336. The item before us today is a notice of review on behalf of the applicant. The applicant is asking the PLRB to review the planning officer's determination to refuse an application for the respective change of use of flatted dwelling to short-term let at 7A Manson Court, Cambuslang. The planning advisor will first describe the background to this request for a review to members. Tony?
Thank you, Chair. So this review relates to 7A Mansion Court in Cambuslang, which is a first floor masonette within an established residential area which sits at the back of Cambuslang Main Street. During the process of the application, one objection was received from someone who lives in the block of flats which the site's related to, raising concerns about noise and adverse activity and the impact on their amenity. So the planning officer's view on this is set out in the report of handling. Essentially, they thought that they concluded that the application was contrary to several policies in MPF 4 and the Local Development Plan 2. Particularly, rounding those up, the concern was around about the impact of the proposal on the surrounding area in terms of the nature and scale of the activity and the impact of increased visitors into this area, and especially in terms of the noise impact that this would have and the disturbance on adjoining properties. And the reasons for refusal are based on those issues. In response, the applicant's review submission makes a number of points in support of the application. They've advised that they do have property management procedures in place which seeks to prevent bad behaviour, I suppose, from guests at the property. They've highlighted that using this property for short-term let does bring economic growth and tourism into the area. They have also advised that they've got a future plan to improve sound insulation within the property, which would minimise noise issues for neighbouring properties. And they've also advised that there is ample parking available in front and to the left of the property, which are not designated for residential use but for wider use, so that their view is that adequate car parking is available. So the main issues then really for the board today is to consider whether the proposal would have an adverse impact on the amenity of the area, particularly in terms of noise and disturbance. I'll pass back to you, Chair, to carry out the review.
Thank you, Tony. The first point for the PLRB to consider and decide is how to proceed with the review. The applicant has indicated that they consider a site inspection and hearing session is required in the determination of this review. Taking account of what is in our papers, we have to decide whether they do in fact contain sufficient information for us to determine the review, or if we need more written information, a hearing or a visit to the site. I think that all the information we have, plus the detailed photographs we have of the site, does provide us with all we need to consider this review, without either a site visit or hearing or any further written submissions. The members therefore agree that we can proceed without a site visit, hearing or any additional information.
Agreed.
Anyone otherwise minded? We will then proceed to review, and I will open the review for discussion or any comments. Can I please ask you to indicate now? No questions or comments. Can I summarise the points made? The application is for the retrospective change of use of a flatted dwelling to short-term let at 7A Manson's Court in Cambuslang. The adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2 identifies the site as being within land designated as general urban area and settlements. If we consider that there is no valid policy for justification to support the short-term use at this location, and it would not accord with policies 23 and 30 of MPF 4 and policy 3, 5 and 6 of the adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2, permission can be refused. Or, if we consider that there is adequate justification for the change of use, we could grant planning permission subject to conditions and or the conclusion of a Section 75 agreement. Our options here today are uphold, reverse or vary the planning decisions. I will now invite for decisions and reasons. Are members minded then to uphold the officer's decision to refuse planning permission? Agreed. Is anyone else otherwise minded? Therefore, the decision of this PLRB is to refuse planning permission, as we are satisfied that the proposed development will be contrary to policies 23 and 30 of MPF 4 and policy 3, 5 and 6 of adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2. The next stage is that a written notice will be issued by the PLRB, and this should be issued within 28 days. Agenda item number 6 is review of case in respect of planning application P231227, page 337 to 402. The item before us today is a notice of review from Block Architects on behalf of Asset Leading Investments. The applicant is asking the PLRB to review the planning officer's determination to refuse an application for the respective change of use of a flatted dwelling to a short-term let at 0 to 2 3 Arm Terrace, Rutherglen. Going to ask the planning advisor to describe the background to this request for review to the members.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So this review relates to a property at Arran Terrace in Rutherglen. It's a ground floor flat in a block of 6. And it's situated within a predominantly residential area within the Spittal area of Rutherglen. Point out as well that this application, like the previous one, is retrospective as well. The property has been operating for short-term let for a period. In terms of the case officer's views on the proposal, that's set out in the report of handling, which is in the papers before members today. Very similar to the concerns that were raised in the previous item, and the reasons for refusal are very similar. The policies that were taken into account are very broadly identical to the ones that were used for the previous review. The main concern is, because it's a block of flats, the impact on the amenity of surrounding neighbours, particularly in terms of noise and disturbance. In response to the refusal, the applicant's review submission points out a number of issues or points they want you to take into account today. They've pointed out, first of all, that the report of handling notes that the property relates to a second floor flat, and they've pointed out that that's not the case. It is actually on the ground floor of the building. In the officer's response to that point in the papers, they've advised that the decision would have been the same whether it was a ground floor or a second floor property. Going on from there, the applicants have advised that the short-term let's been operating for 2 years, over 2 years, and during that time the occupancy rate has been 67%. They believe noise has never been a factor for anybody living close by, mainly because the property is occupied largely by professionals who are working away from home. They've also advised that the operator, the short-term let is managed by a letting company, and they've never received any complaints about nuisance or noise. The main issues then before members today, again very similar to the previous application, is whether the proposal is acceptable in terms of the impact on the immunity of neighbours in the surrounding area, taking into account of the policies in NPF 4 and LDP 2. And I'll hand back to you, Chair, for the review.
Thank you, Tony. The first point for the PLRB to consider and decide is how to proceed with the review. The applicant has advised that they consider the review can proceed without any further procedure. Taking account of what is on papers, we have to decide whether they do in fact contain sufficient information for us to determine the review, or if we need more written information, a hearing or a visit to the site. I think that all the information we have, plus the detailed photographs we have of the site, does provide us with all we need to consider this review, without either a site visit or hearing or any further written submissions. The members therefore agree that we can proceed without a site visit, hearing or any additional information.
Agreed.
Anyone otherwise minded? We will then proceed to review and will open up for any discussions. If you could please indicate now. I will then summarise the points made. The application is for the retrospective change of use of a flatted dwelling to short-term let at 022 3 Arm Terrace, Rutherglen. Adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2 identifies the site as being with land designated as general urban area and settlements. If we consider that there is no valid policy justification to support the short-term use at this location, and it would not accord with policies 23 and 30 of NPF 4 and policy 3, 5 and 6 of the adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2, permission can be refused. Or if we consider that there is adequate justification for the change of use, we could grant planning permission subject to conditions and or the conclusion of a Section 75 agreement. Our options here are to uphold, reverse or vary the planning decision. I will now invite for decision and reasons. Are members minded then to uphold the officer's decision to refuse planning permission? All agreed?
Agreed.
Is anyone else otherwise minded? Therefore, the decision of this PLRB is to refuse the planning permission, as we are satisfied that the proposed development be contrary to policies 23 and 30 of NPF 4 and policies 3, 5 and 6 of the adopted South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2. The next stage is that a written decision notice will be issued by the PLRB, and this should be issued within 28 days. Agenda item number 7, there are no items of urgent business. I'm going to ask the clerk to stop the recording of the meeting, and I wish you all a good weekend. Thank you.